You guys cheered when the slide went up, so you must be excited. I'm Geoff Keighley from the Game Awards. Excited to be here for the Spyro panel. We have this is like I do a lot of panels over the years, and this is like the biggest panel I think I've ever hosted. We have 9 guests, which is like insane. First of all, by show of hands, how many of you guys played the original Spyro? All right, so this is definitely a fan audience. Well, as you guys know, the Reignited Trilogy will be coming out a little bit later this year, and we are so excited to have a panel here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the game. That's like actually 20 years ago this came out, which is amazing. And we're going to have sort of a really awesome discussion about the making of the original game. The guys from Insomniac that built it 20 years ago are here, and then we're going to talk to the guys from Toys for Bob that have sort of adapted it and reimagined it for the current generation of consoles, which is great. And we also have some very special guests that were involved in the game over the years as well. So without further ado, let's get to our amazing panelists. I'm going to introduce them one by one. First of all, please welcome the president, CEO, and founder of Insomniac Games, Ted Price, TCP. Oh, yeah. Are we doing this in the right order? Oh, yeah, all right. Yeah, I guess I probably should have gone off. Let's go off this then. Got to figure out the right way to do it. Got to match your name to the seat. All right. Next up from Insomniac Games, we have the director of experience, Brian Allgeier. Brian, come on out. It's a puzzle to get all the panelists in the right seats. All right. Next up, the chief creative strategist for Insomniac, Brian Hastings. Next is, he was the producer at Universal Interactive Studios on Spyro and now a professor of computational media at UC Santa Cruz. Please welcome Michael John, MJ. All right, these original guys, 20 years ago. We'll talk a lot about that. Now let's introduce you to the team at Toys for Bob that had the awesome opportunity to reignite Spyro. First up is the co-studio head of Toys for Bob, Paul Yan. Paul, come on up. Next up is art director Josh Nadelberg. Next up, music remixer Toys for Bob, Stephan Vankov. And finally, we're all still standing as we have 2 very special guests here. It's such an honor to introduce musician-composer of the original Spyro soundtrack, Stewart Copeland. There you go. And finally, voice actor of many things and also the voice of Spyro, Tom Kenny. Welcome. You may all be seated.
Please be seated.
What a polite panel. Everyone saying. All right, so we have lots of cool stuff to get through here. And you're going to see never-before-seen stuff about how they made the original game, how they remade it, and we got some cool news, giveaways, things on this panel, so stick around until the end. That's all I'll say. First of all, let's start with you, Paul, Toys for Bob. Reignited Trilogy, we know, coming out this year. We know what happened last year with the excitement around Crash, and everyone went crazy for it. As everyone knows on social media, everyone was waiting for Spyro to hopefully be the next thing, and luckily earlier this year you confirmed that was going to happen. Why were you guys so excited to take on Spyro and kind of bring it back to life in 2018?
It's Spyro's turn. It's 20 years. This is the year that he needs to come out. For Toys for Bob, we've been working, and these original games have been such a huge inspiration for us for such a long time, and all the ideas, the characters, the worlds, those ideas inspired the Skylanders universe, and it's been great for us. We're super excited to circle back to classic Spyro and do him justice today.
Well, it looks amazing. I got to check it out at E3. We're going to show you lots of it here, and you guys have done a really faithful recreation of it. Ted, on your side, you know, Spyro 20 years ago, Insomniac has been around for more than 20 years. I remember meeting you, I think, at one of the first E3s with your first game, Disruptor. Tell us about, you know, the creation of Spyro back in the day. I mean, how did this, there you go. This is the team photo from, I guess, 21 years ago. You can see Ted there in the back. How did this come to be, you know, for Insomniac to do this character action game with a dragon? Like, what's the story? What's the story of how did this even happen 20 years ago?
Well, you mentioned Disruptor, and that was our first game as a studio. And I think back then, Brian, we probably had 5 people, maybe?
We had 5 at the end, yeah.
In the studio, and we had just finished shipping this game. It was a first-person shooter, and it really didn't do very well. We were proud of it, but nobody really paid much attention to it. It was also sort of a dark game. It was a first-person shooter. It was supposed to be dark in tone, even though it was a little bit unintentionally comic. And after we finished it, we were sitting around in our very small office looking at each other going, what the hell are we going to do next? Should we do another first-person shooter? Should we do something that's totally different? And I remember Mark Cerny, who we were also working with, along with Michael at the time, said, you guys realize that Nintendo right now has a lock on the family market. And you guys might think about something that is less dark, something that has a little bit more humor. And we realized that this was an opportunity for us to sort of go in a different direction, sort of to breathe some lightness into the games we made and do something that was a little bit more family friendly. So we started brainstorming, and one of our artists named Craig Stitt said, I've always wanted to make a game about a dragon. And I remember, Brian, you probably remember this too, the moment he said that, we all sort of looked at each other and said, yeah, that would be really cool. And I don't know what it is about dragons, but there's this thing in our culture, I think, that really makes us all excited. So we started brainstorming, and eventually we started with, and I won't go too far with this, Geoff, but we started with very large, angry, scary dragons, and eventually, with the help of an artist named Charles Zimbalist, got to the Spyro you see today, who is a more juvenile, friendly, accessible, relatable dragon. And from there, things just took off.
Yeah, we've got some of Charles' original sketches we're going to show you guys in a little bit, so stay tuned for that. Really cool stuff. The game, you know, Michael, Brian, Ted, the original game, as we're seeing here footage, if you remember what it looked like 20 years ago, because we sort of look, you know, we look at old games through these sort of rose-colored glasses sometimes. We remember the moments, but it's like actually seeing the footage, it brings back so many memories to me. And, you know, this is a time when, like, you know, PS1, like 3D polygonal, you know, games were just coming into life. So tell us about, you know, some of the innovations and the things that you guys were doing back then that were like extremely hard to do, which is, you know, today is secondhand. But when you were doing this game, like what were the things that were, you know, sort of remarkable and different that you wanted to do with this game?
One of the biggest challenges is on the PS1, you didn't have very many textured polygons. You could draw a lot of Giro shaded polygons, but you couldn't do very many textured. And so the challenge was you just couldn't do very big rooms. Everyone was making kind of small interior areas. And I think it was Mark Cerny who originally suggested, you know, you could do long views if you managed to solve the problem of transitioning from high detail to low detail. So I guess that was our big innovation, is like making the tools and the engine pipeline that Al did the engine.
So you could show on it, but as you get closer, then the detail.
Right, and so it was a matter of, you'd fade to the bigger polygons that were Giro shaded, but to do it smoothly so that you'd never see the pop was pretty challenging to do, like both artistically and technically. Yeah, so that was like a big thing for us.
You were showing the Clifftown level earlier, which was, I think, one of the best examples of that, where you'd see that way, way off in the distance. It was actually just big flat polygons, and then it would transition into the high detail.
Yeah, no, again, it's amazing what you guys were able to do. And even, you know, the expression of the character back then, I mean, it was, you know, that's why everyone, I think we all fell in love with Spyro. It's just that, you know, the emotion that you were able to get out of, you know, such simplistic graphics is incredible. Stewart, we're going to talk a lot about, you know, the process of making the music back then and everything, but I just want to kick this off by asking you, like, you know, the original trilogy, this was such a cool partnership for you to, like, be a part of this. I think it was completely unexpected. I remember when it was announced back in the day, and it's like, wow, this is like, you know, I would never guess this was going to come to be. Why was it meaningful to you to like be a part of this 20 years ago?
It came out of the blue. It was an incoming phone call. I didn't even play games. In fact, I had a hard time playing Spyro. I had to get the cheats so I could complete a level so that I could write the music for it. But actually, I ended up playing the game with my kids, and it became a very important aspect of my family growing up. Yeah. And it was like a scene from the 50s where the family is all gathered around, engaged in one activity together. And Patrick, my son, who was 14 at the time, he'd be at the controls, turn left, and all of his sisters and brothers are shouting at him, you know, pick up the treasure, no, go get the... And 20 years later, Patrick, my son, is working at Insomniac.
All comes full circle. Tom, you got to do Spyro's voice in the original trilogy. You've done, you know, some amazing characters over the years. Why does this one stand out to you?
Well, you know, Spyro has this whole other life. I wasn't the first Spyro, nor was I the last Spyro, right?
Yeah.
I did.
James Bond.
Yes, exactly. It's so I was the second, you know, the second and third games, but those seem to be the ones that you know, had the most weight for people. And it's funny, like you were saying, Stewart, you know, you do a gig and you do a job, and we're freelance people, so you know, you do the job and it's fun and you have a good time and you do the best job you can, and then you get in your car and you drive to the next 20 years of gigs. But for me, the amazing thing was a couple of years ago at Comic-Cons, people started, like Spyro seemed to kind of rise again, like in terms of like people coming up to me with Spyro stuff and really wanting me to sign the very copy that they played when they were kids, like tattered booklet from the inside of the box, or like a ripped up box. Sometimes the box and the instruction manual were gone, and I was just signing the disc. And I was like, wow, there's a weird spike in Spyro the Dragon awareness happening right now. You know, it's kind of been going on. So it's really fun when something that you did comes back around the horn, and people that played it at a formative stage of their life, you know, still love it.
Share it now with their kids.
Yeah, they want to see a more like a plus version of it. You know what I mean? Like Junior Varsity Spyro, and now Varsity Spyro is coming with Reignited.
Yeah, it's so cool that it is all coming back, like all three of them. Let's turn back the clock a little bit before we turn forward. For the Insomniac team, tell us about, you know, Spyro the character. Like, we all, you know, just know him as Spyro, but from what I understand, like, he started as a green dragon named Pete. So how do we go from, not Puff, Pete, how do we go from
Pete's Dragon.
Pete the Green Dragon to Spyro the Purple Dragon?
Well, so we use code names for all of our games, first of all. And we decided that Pete would be a great code name for Spyro because Pete's Dragon had already been released by Disney. We knew we could never use Pete. Then, when it came time to pick a name for Spyro, everybody was asking, well, why can't we use Pete? Come on, it's a really good name. And names sort of grow on you. And we had sort of adopted that as almost the final name. Of course, we couldn't use it. So we were desperate. We were about to announce the game, and we had no idea what we were going to name this little guy. We finally figured it out, I think, right before we announced it.
And you were, I think, Brian, you were telling me a little bit about like the idea of like 5 characters in a name was something you guys wanted to.
Oh yeah, that was that's a long story. So Mark Cerny, who's probably the smartest person in the entire games industry, and like I think got a lifetime achievement award at the age of 30 or something like that. So anyway, so he's working with us. He's like a big influence on the game. And one night we don't have a name. He comes over to me in the programming bay and is like, so what do you think about names? I'm like, I like the name Spitfire. And he's like, well, let me tell you something about names. So it's like, names at work, there's studies. And it's like, names at work, like, you need 5 letters, like Mario, Sonic. You know, if you want a mascot, you got to have, like, about 5 letters. I'm like, okay. And he's like, and you know what? And names that end in O tend to be popular because, like, you know, like Mario, like audio, video, things like that. They connect with people. I'm like, okay, and then it's like, and here's the funny thing. In Japan, like the words that start with spa are really popular. And there's a magazine that's literally just called Spa. I'm like, okay, so I'm like putting it together and like, you know, and make Speedo, Spoolo, and I'm like, and then I was like, oh, I got it. This is it, Spyro. And he's like, nah, that sounds like Spirograph. But I'm like, he just spirals around and it's kind of got the word pyro in there. And he's like, nah, Spirograph. and then like, so I'm all disheartened. And then like a week later, this is the funny part. A week later, he came back and he talked to Amy Blair, director of marketing at Sony, and like she suggested the same thing, but like, apparently it was a lot more convincing. I imagine they had like the same like step-by-step conversation, but Amy came up with it. So like, so yeah, I think it was meant to be.
Meant to be Spyro. So tell us about him going from green to purple. I know sometimes, like I remember with Crashes, like sometimes based on like the colors and what will stand out.
How many colors? We must have gone through like 10 different colors.
Yeah, we had a whole. Once we picked the Spyro, the Spyro look, right?
Yeah.
The shape. We started coloring him from. We went from green through yellow, through pink, through blue, orange, every single color of the rainbow. So we had this big poster of Spyro in all of his rainbow colors, and we sort of were we were asking ourselves, well, what would really stand out, right? What hasn't been done? And Green Dragons, at least at the time, we thought, that's obvious. Everybody does Green Dragons. So I think
we also tried, like red was a popular choice, but on NTSC monitors, it blooms out too much. And then
NTSC.
We tried light blue, and then it doesn't look good against the sky. And then and green didn't work because it was like against the grass. It was like we tried every color.
Right. There were there was actually some pseudoscience behind it. Yeah.
And then the purple was like the one color that looked good in like every environment.
Yeah.
And Brian Allgeier, this character, you know, took on such a life of its own. When you were working with it, like, tell us about sort of the fun and personality of Spyro and how you were able to sort of bring that to life in, you know, the games that you worked on. Like, because it's, you know, the character, even though it was so primitive, there was so much fun and personality, I think, to him.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think what I always appreciated about Spyro is he has a very kind of cat-like nature to him, and, you know, just a very fun quality. You know, he's very agile and moving about, and yeah, I just really liked being able to glide long distances with him. I came on actually at the end of Spyro 2, and I was a big fan of the original game, and I was just like begging Michael John to try to get me in at Insomniac Games. So it was really exciting to be able to work on this project where I was a fan, and I was designing a lot of levels. And so being able to create these long view distances and watch this little guy with his little wings gliding across the level was such a fun experience.
I also want to give Tom a lot of credit, though, too, because when we talk about personalities for our characters, they really come through. They're built just as much by the actors. I mean, we have a basic idea of what we want a character to sound like and be, but the voice actors are the ones who bring them to life. And Tom lent a lot of his personality and his vision for who Spyro was to the character. And I think that's why one of the big reasons Spyro blew up the way it did. So.
Yay, Tom.
That's very nice. Thanks.
So, you know, what's amazing, you guys did this 20 years ago with that level of personality. Now we fast forward 2 decades later, and, you know, there's obviously what we can do with animation and, you know, technology is just incredible for these characters. So I want to transition to the Toys for Bob guys and talk a bit about your approach of sort of bringing the character back to life in 2018, because you want to, you know, pay sort of homage to the original character and how it was designed, but then there's all these new tools about, you know, more expressions and detail. So could you guys maybe talk a bit about, you know, sort of how you brought Spyro forward 2 decades?
Yeah, we were fortunate to be able to extract a lot of data from the game so that we could accurately recreate things. We weren't able to get Spyro's model, so we ended up looking back at the original game model from screenshots, playing the game, capturing it, and we really wanted to focus on the model that was in the video game. The marketing art was a little different, and the guys at Insomniac were adamant that we get Spyro right. If there's one thing we do, we have to really get Spyro right. So we started doing early sketches to kind of feel out the shapes. How could we translate them in an era where we have 50, 100 times as much data that we can put into these characters. I don't know, Michael John, you were telling me that there was 120 polygons in a character back then?
Spyro got more than that, but all the NPCs had a budget of 120 triangles.
120 triangles? I think there's more than that in Spyro's pupil in the Reignited Trilogy. So we built our first prototype model of Spyro, and kind of hearkening back to what you said about bringing the character to life, it's not just the voice acting, it's also the amazing animators that bring these characters to life. So once we had our first
A lot of
model-
it is the voice acting.
Yeah. A lot. So it was really important for us that the model was able to really perform. So we put it through a whole bunch of stress tests, and our great concept artists tried to capture expressions that we really wanted him to achieve, and we made sure that the model could hit all those and really kind of emote the way that we wanted to. Because, I mean, Spyro's so full of character, and you're right, that's one of the reasons why people, I think, really became attached to him back then. So that was really critical to us, was to be able to like get those performances. And then we brought our early work down to the guys at Insomniac to show them what we were up to, and hopefully get their blessings. And we showed them some works in progress of the model, and Ted got a little picky. I think you had a couple of thoughts about him.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's really, when you've lived with a character for a long time, some of the nuances in terms of scale stand out. And we had a lot of great discussions about the size of his crest, the size of his eyes, the shape of his snout, which, and you guys were awesome about saying, okay,
absolutely.
let's discuss this versus, come on, we're making this. And from every step of the way, it's been awesome to see the collaboration, which we appreciate.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, we wanted to make sure we got them right. So we went back after a meeting with you guys and did a whole bunch of additional design work. We were really thinking about how's he going to perform. Now that we have more anatomy in the models, what's he like? Is he a kitty dragon? Is he a puppy dragon? Is he a horse dragon? Does he gallop? How does he move? So we really got into understanding Spyro. We changed his gait. Michael noticed that.
Changed his gait.
We like his new gait.
But you made it cuter, so it's all okay.
Thank you. And after iteration after iteration, we came to the Spyro that we have now. We've changed a couple things to make him feel a little bit more heroic as he gets more polys and more shapes. This is a great little sketch. Or not sketch, this is the artist who did the final design. This is his work in progress of doing this painting.
Wow.
And it's, he's just so full of life. I love this little guy.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
really.
cool. I mean, Ted, from your end, and I mean, what I think is so great about these remasters or remakings is that, the original team, you guys were consulted, involved, like, how do you think they've done, sort of, now when you look at the sort of finished product?
I love it. I mean, you guys have gotten even more expression out of Spyro. I mean, we did our best, but he really has.
That's the original game, and then today, and look at the difference. Yeah.
Yes, you can clearly see the evidence there. And what's great is that you guys really understand who Spyro is. I mean, I think that's at the core what matters. And as a result, the animators can bring his personality, make it even more obvious. And that's what's exciting for us, just to see how far you pushed him.
Awesome.
Amazing. Yeah. Now, we've seen lots of Spyro stills. Now we're going to show you guys, I think, some exclusive new stuff in terms of Spyro in action for some cutscenes, speaking of the personality, and you'll hear Tom's voice and whatnot. So let's take a look at a couple examples of Spyro's personality coming through in some cutscenes in Spyro, both the original and today's.
Thank you for releasing me, Spyro. Free 10 dragons in the artisan world, then find the balloonist. He'll transport you to the next world.
What about Nasty Nork? I'm going after him.
Find dragons first. That's all I can tell you.
Whoa, rough landing. Hi, which way's the... beach? Hey, stop staring. Haven't you guys ever seen a dragon before? You're a dragon? You got a problem with that, pussycat?
I mean, first of all, you look at that stuff from, 20 or 18 years ago, Spyro 2, it's still amazing what you guys accomplished back then. So hats off to Insomniac for what you guys did back then. It still holds up pretty well. But again, we look at the stuff today, I mean, that's, feels like an animated movie we're watching, but it's actually from a game, which is incredible. So, Tom, we heard your voice there, both old and new. Tell us a bit about, approaching this character in, the original trilogy when you got brought on for 2. I mean, how did you come up with this character? I mean, what did you base it on? Tell us about the Spyro voice. How did it come to life?
It's like anything, whether it's a cartoon or a video game or whatever. You really are just looking at the data, right? And you're looking at the design and the attitude of the character and talking to people. And Spyro is all attitude. And I remember at the time thinking the hardest thing was you want to give him that brash confidence, you know, where he's ready to rumble and he's adventurous, but and he'll kick butt if he has to, but you don't want him to be a jerk, you know what I mean? Like I looked at it as like Popeye the Sailor Man. Like Popeye the Sailor Man was really kind, but when he needed to, and he was good to his friends, but when he needed to rumble, you know, he'd take his spinach and he's good to go, you know? So that was the hardest thing was keeping him likable. And the hardest thing of doing it now, like 20 years later, was that they wanted to keep the reads pretty similar to the older games, you know, with the upgraded animation, and the sound files weren't of a quality that could be used again. So, you know, you're sort of listening to your line reads from 20 years ago and doing them and going, oh man, it's like, I think 20 years later, I probably would have read that line a little differently, or I would have hit that word, you know, you're kind of micromanaging everything. But I think, you know, really it's all about attitude and trying to make it sound like 20 years hasn't passed. You know what I mean? You got a problem with that, pussycat? Where's Nasty Nork? I'm going after him. Wow, he really hasn't aged. Tom really hasn't aged well, you know. It's all attitude. Spyro is so fun, and I love in the new game. Did you go for more puppy or more colt or more? Because he kind of does a puppy gallop.
He's a puppy kitty.
Now.
He's a puppy kitty dragon now.
I love it. Yeah, I kind of like the when he runs. You know, it's kind of the way I run. You know, it's really fun. It's cool to see him with all that added movement. You know, that you're able to have now.
By the way, hanging out backstage with Tom, he is that guy.
And you're that guy too. Come on.
Well, speaking of Tom, can we get a couple maybe line reads for the crowd? Some Spyro.
Oh, let's see. Well, you're toast. You know, where's Nasty Nork? I'm going after him. You know. Any other ones? I don't know. Those are the ones I remember.
Anyone else?
You used all the ones that I would have used.
Call out a line for him to say.
Thank you.
Been 20 years.
What is it?
It's been 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's been 20 years.
Fun. Well, yeah, it's as Ted said, it's like, you know, the character, the animation, the personality, the voice. It's so cool to see Spyro, you know, and although Spyro's been around in the past 20 years, to see the original stories coming back in such an authentic way, I think is really awesome. So one thing that I think, you know, we're going to get a little more technical here about sort of how this actually was done in terms of designing the world of Spyro, because one thing that, you know, was unique, I think, for this game is that the team at Toys for Bob, it's not like they could sort of take the old game and just kind of use that geometry and levels and build that. They actually had to go in and kind of really recreate everything. So maybe, you know, on the Insomniac side, could you tell us a bit about like how the game was designed back in the day? You know, how did you sort of build sketches? How did you do things? Like Brian Allgeier, maybe you could tell us a bit about like the process of making a game for PS1?
Sure, absolutely. So I was excited to be able to dream up these amazing levels and worlds, and but I had to fit everything on a single sheet of green graph paper. And we actually used mechanical pencils to sketch out every level. And if we wanted to go crazy, we might use 1.5 pages of green graph paper. And so those would actually get scanned in, but then the artists would then take them and actually make them into awesome looking levels, obviously. And each one of these levels was roughly 6,000 polygons. And I think Spyro is around 250. So that's not
Spyro's ear is like
exactly
60,000.
Yeah. And the thing we always thought about when we were designing levels was having a really cool opening view, having that signature view that when you started, it was almost like looking at a painting. It was something that invited you into it. And one thing that Brian Hastings would always talk about is the fantasy of the familiar and how there were, you know, we wanted to create some familiar aspects to these levels. We might have like these lost fleet of ships, or you know, various, you know, locations that you would look at, and that's something that you dreamt about going to. Of course, we also had the more crazy levels. We had like, I think, crystal bears and like gnomes and some stuff like, I don't know what we were on while we were designing those, but, and this was an example of like the Lost Fleet level. But we always had fun just kind of throwing ideas together. It was a very collaborative, creative process. We said, oh, why don't we have a level with some ships that's haunted, but it's not really haunted. There's these Rhinocs, and they've got these ghosts that you flame them, and the sheet burns up. And I remember pitching that to Brian Hastings, and he's like, we don't have a Z buffer, we don't have all this tech that we can do it, but somehow he made it work.
Wow. Amazing to see.
I was just going to add to it. This was kind of a turning point for us in terms of how we design, our whole approach to design, because when we first came into starting the design of Spyro, our whole design philosophy had been molded by 2D side-scroller games, classic games like Sonic and Mario, and so our idea of what a level was like, you have a start point, you have an end point, and you go through it, and you defeat enemies and challenges along the way. And so when we first started doing the levels, that was what we did, and that's how we approached it. But then when we got the first 2 levels in the game, what we found out is actually just exploring the world was fun in itself, and that was gameplay in itself. And that our big epiphany was that taking the player and putting them into a world that they've never imagined and letting them explore and discover it on their own could be an unforgettable experience. And then we sort of shifted our whole philosophy to looking for more ways to make the world a memorable place and a magical place, and give it discoveries and give it things to find. And that changed our whole approach, I think, from that point onward.
Yeah, it was like we were going from making rooms, like the first couple test levels were kind of rooms that we made, to going to making places. And I remember there was some spots where, you could walk outside the level and walk on stuff, and then it was kind of like, well, what if we just kind of let you walk outside the level? Maybe that's actually kind of cool. So like if you look at Cliff Town, where you could go to the very top of the cliff and then turn around and glide all the way back to the stuff that you never thought you could be on before. That was the kind of like, okay, now it's a place. And it's a place that's worth exploring, as opposed to just a place to go bonk a bunch of enemies.
And how did the technology limit you back there? Like that long view idea, did that always work? Was it were there limits to what you could do? I mean, you're trying to do obviously a lot of cool fire effects and flying and all these things. Like, did you feel it all limited at the time in terms of the gameplay you could build?
5,000 polys.
Yeah. We were constantly, as the level designers, having to pay attention to how much can you see in any given camera view. And so like Brian was talking about, like we'd have these beautifully framed openings, and yeah, that's part of why we did it, but also part of why we did it is so you couldn't see all this stuff, because if you did, the frame rate would go to nothing. So yeah, as the level designs always had to be really carefully occluding big spaces, so it didn't. It
seemed like you put an enemy in. I remember even crashing. You put an enemy in, and then like that's going to affect the entire level. So it's like you can't just like populate more enemies in. That's you have to reduce the draw distance, or do less of a long view. So yeah, it's amazing what again you guys were able to accomplish on PS1. So now obviously there's lots more horsepower in these systems. So Paul, for the Toys for Bob guys, you created a special tool, which you guys may not know about, called Spyro Scope, that helped you guys recreate these levels. So what I think is really important here is that all the level geometry, for whatever reasons you didn't have sort of access to that, so you basically had to go in and reimagine the game, but you wanted it obviously to be extremely authentic to the original. So tell us a bit about that process.
Well, the first thing that we did was one of the first questions we asked Ted was, do you guys still have the source material, the source code? Do you have any source assets? It's going to be really, really helpful if we had a starting point. And unfortunately, I think we lost, some of the data got lost in some of the move or something like that, but we didn't have that on hand, so we had to recreate it from the ground up. But what we did have was an awesome rock star engineer named Steve, and what he did was he built this tool called Spyro Scope, which sat on top of an emulation of the game, and it was able to extract the vertex information of all the levels that you see right there, so it's actually running in real time with the game. In addition, you see all the placements of everything that's in the world running, and we were able to extract like pathing information. So we're looking at the thief over there, and so at every frame, where exactly is he? And we were able to recreate those paths and then drop it into our environments. We're running the game in
So it's just someone playing it, and the computer basically just picking up as you go around? Like,
yep.
Wow.
So there's a lot of, like, we call it Spyro Scope because it's putting Spyro under a microscope, because we're studying every single bit of detail. And then this was taking that path data and then dropping it into our beautiful new art now. And then we would recreate splines and then figure out, do we want to, like, smooth out a little kinks here and there. So that informed a lot of that, and the detail for Spyro, how he jumps, like at frame 4 and 5, how high is he, how quickly is he moving? We wanted to make sure that mechanically the gameplay feels exactly the way that you remember it. And then on the art side, that's where we would put
This is so cool. Look at this. This is side by side, right? The old game and the new game. Yeah. So look how different that is. Yet it still feels, you know, so authentic to the way it played and the placement of items and everything. It's really incredible.
Yeah, it was important that like every gem is where it was. Every treasure chest is exactly where it was. The characters are moving the same way they did. Spyro jumps like precisely the height he jumped in the original game, so that every jump is as challenging as it was in the original.
Yeah, one of the things about Spyro is just the movement of him had to be this kind of joyful experience, like at every moment. And it was kind of weird because he has 4 legs, and you know all that's really hard. And you know when you get to play it, the Toys for Bob team just really brought that out. Like it is every bit as joyful, and maybe even sometimes a little more, to run Spyro around and to glide and jump. It's just, you guys did a beautiful, beautiful job of bringing that out in the gameplay.
I want to second that. I'm amazed by what you guys have done.
Did you make the blue guy a little slower this time around?
I think you just got better at the game.
No, and I think, you know, this is the thing, like people throw around, you know, like remasters or for lots of games, right? And sometimes it's like, hey, we're just updating the res or whatever. I mean, this is, you know, such a, you guys can see it right here. I think these side-by-sides are just incredible to see that, you know, very accurate to the original game, but feels very modern with, you know, everything, right? From the physics to the art and the world, and exactly, like, look at these characters, right? And that's sort of like, the before and after is amazing. So,
and the camera.
Camera, yeah, that's true. Yep, yeah, right, everything. It just feels like across the board, it's super authentic. From a kind of art perspective, you know, more fidelity we can see, but can you maybe tell us a bit about how you approach sort of the art design of these levels? Because again, like you can really push the graphics today and push them almost too far, and I think you wanted to obviously be inspired by the original game, but then, you know, make it a little more modern. So tell us about that sort of balance and how you brought that to life.
Well, Spyroscope also allowed us to actually extract the original mesh from the game. So what we did was we had our concept artists use vistas from the captured game and actually paint over those as we did the redesigning and reimagining of these worlds. And, you know, you guys said 6,000 polygons for the whole world? Okay. That's amazing. You did an incredible job. We don't have those limitations now. So we were able to kind of do more storytelling. I think that was kind of one of the primary kind of motivations behind all the redesigns is how do we tell a deeper, richer story with the additional technology and fidelity that we have. So the concept artists would paint over the original map. We'd use the original map as collision in the game, so it's super accurate. And then our amazing environment artists would bring this to life, and the environments are rich and full of lush grass that burns, and you can see the draw distances you're talking about are still there, but they're full of more detail and movement, and it's been a joy to take these old worlds and bring them back to life.
Looks stunning. From the characters, we saw one of those clips, some of the characters, like bringing them forward. We talked about Spyro, but I'm curious about like the dragon, other characters. Josh, maybe tell us a bit about some of the sort of the characters, and those are where I think you pushed even further in terms of like adding much more expression to them and fidelity. So tell us about that.
Again, 120 polygons, right? So for the dragons in particular, we were like, these are all characters that fans have come to love, right? Even though they all kind of look alike, and there's different factions of dragons in each of the worlds, but they're all similar. So we really wanted to take this opportunity so that every time you unlock and free one of these dragons, you're freeing a new character. And so the Peacekeepers have a different look from the Magic Crafters, who have a different look from the Dreamweavers, and every one of them really comes to life in the new game.
Amazing.
It was so much fun.
No, and the voice and the personality is it's incredible what you guys have done. So that's awesome.
Yeah, great. Yeah,
let's talk a bit now about music and the story of how this all came together. Stu and Stephan have been very patient. We got some great stuff for you guys. This is going to be really cool. First of all, MJ, from your end, I'd love to hear the story of kind of how you track down, how you decide this is the style of music you want. He's the person to do it, because again, I would never have predicted this. I remember when it was announced, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And when we do Game Awards and other things, we're always looking for kind of cool musicians who are involved in the space and excited about it. How did this idea, was it you and Ted sitting around one day saying hey, this would be awesome? Or how do you even get to the idea of approaching Stu for this?
Yeah, that
Gene Simmons wasn't available.
That's okay.
That's who Ted wanted, but no. So we got to this point where it was like, okay, looks like the game's for real. We better start thinking about who's going to do the music for it. And so we kind of got some demo CDs from some contract musicians and kind of pulled together. We knew we wanted it to be kind of a lighthearted sound and kind of jaunty. And then myself and one of the engineers, we put together basically a demo of there's this musician, this musician, this musician, all against our existing levels. And I kind of sneaked in there a track from Stewart Copeland because I'd been a fan of him since I was 8. And I'd been following his career, through the Police, but also through the stuff he was doing more recently. And it was a track from the Rhythmatist album, actually. And then we kind of did a blind test with the whole team. And which one do you like? Which one do you like? And everybody's like, oh, that one, definitely that one. And I'm like, yeah, punked, that's Stewart Copeland, we can't get him. And one of the members of the team, Jackie Ivanochik, she was like, oh yeah, watch me. And sure enough, she called his agent, and I don't know, a week later, I'm driving in my car up to the house of Stewart Copeland and trying not to just freak out. And we brought one of the blue testing PlayStations with a build of the game with his music on it, and put it down in his living room. And I'm shaking as I hook up the TV.
Come on.
And he hook it up and he starts playing it, and his agent's there. And then this is the part where I need Stewart to finish the story, because I don't know how we got from there to you working on the game, because it's amazing.
So what did you think, Stuart? I mean,
What'd you do?
Were you considering this? Did they say something that convinced you? What appealed to you about it?
Well, the fun thing about the game was that I could make all this music without having to dodge dialogue. In filmmaking, you're just getting started on a piece of music, and then the scene's over. You're writing a 15-second piece of music, and that music has got to be secondary to whatever the hell they're talking about. And so the idea of playing with this game, and by the way, playing the game was fun. So I'd be playing the game, and I'd get.
Here's some footage. This is screenshots of you actually playing the game back in the day, right? Yeah.
And I great. This joke's been repeated, but I'd be sitting there and don't interrupt me when I'm working. And I wasn't very good at playing the game, but I really enjoyed playing it. And when you're scoring a film, the picture does provide the music. It's some weird thing happens. You see the scene and you just start hearing the music. And playing this game and this purple dragon running around in this kind of very benign world, it visually had an atmosphere, and that atmosphere is where the music came from.
The next thing we know, he's making music for the.
So was it an instant yes for you though?
Oh yeah.
Really? Okay.
It was because it was a different world of just not having these show and tells where the director's going, I think that line there, I need to feel the dishonesty, but then there's kind of a hope underlying it here with a hint of humor, but basically you can't ignore the underlying doom, and it's just all, all this stuff. But with the game, you're just playing the game, and the other thing that was weird is there's so much of it. I think somebody told me that there was 100 levels or 90 levels. That's 100 pieces of music of 4 minutes duration. So over the 3 years, let's see some arithmetic here divided by 3. That's what's 30 tracks. That's a quadruple album of backing tracks, which is cool because you do the backing track. That's the fun part, because writing lyrics is the hard part. You don't have to write lyrics. 100, 30 backing tracks. And the weird thing was that it went very quickly. I would do 4 a day. actually, I'd write 4 things. Okay, that's good. Okay, that's another one. And I'd do like 4. And then the next day I'd come back and finish those 4 tracks. Then the day after that, 4 more new ones. And the weird thing about creativity, at least in music, is that the more you get going and you get a momentum, instead of it being shallower because of quantity, the quantity produces quality. You get into a role. And the music that I wrote for Spyro was some of the best music I ever wrote. It may seem on the surface like a shallow environment to be creating great music, but in fact, it's the best music. And now, I'm not in the movie business anymore. I do fancy music for big orchestras. I'm a symphonic composer, and guess where I look for tunes, for bass riffs, for bass lines? I go back into the old Spyro catalog, because that 3-note trip, dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, that's been going around my head for 20 years. I write a new symphony, and I've got to not do that tune again. Wow. That bass line, dun-dun-dum, ba-dum-bum-bum, ba-dum-dum. Every time I want to write a piece of music, I got to not do that one again. It's the same kind of thing. And the quantity of the music that I had to produce, in a weird way, contributed to the quality.
So was it, were you writing music to specific levels at that point, or were you just doing cool tracks and then comparing them?
Kind of. Michael would bring me in some more levels, and it'd take me ages. He'd have to show me how to make this jump here. And then eventually he took pity on me and gave me the cheats.
Sometimes I'd come and the game would be paused in his studio. Like, he's like, I'm stuck right here. Can you get me past this spot?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I'd wait for Michael to come over because I'm stuck. I can only get here to here. I can't make that. How the heck do you get over that jump there? And Michael goes, here. Without even thinking, he'd just race through the game and take me to the end of the level. Wow! How do you do that?
And 20 years ago, tell us about the process of actually making the music. Like, I think we have an image here that sort of shows like the MIDI and sort of how, like, what was the technical way that you actually made this music?
It's entirely electronic. Wow. There is not a single live, not even the drums. I didn't hit or strum or blow a single note. It was all on a Fairlight. It was driven by Fairlight at first, which was an 8-bit, 8-track machine. In fact, at the beginning, I had available 8 notes. I had this line of 8 and 8 monophonic. So if I have a 2-note piano chord, that's 2 out of 8. So the bass takes up 1, 2-note piano chords. The guitar was just a sample of 1 chord up and down and up and down. It's the simplest stuff. But once again, when art is distilled, it has more power. Working with a skinnier palette actually somehow made the creative juices flow more richly.
Wow. Now, Stephan, you had the enviable task of taking Stewart's music and figuring out how to bring it forward in time.
Now, before you get into this, Stephan, on my social media, people say, "Oh, they better not mess with your music, man. You better be doing it." And then I say nothing. But this young man has done an incredible job. I am so honored at the work that he put into figuring out all my tunes and stuff, and did an incredible job in my opinion.
Oh, that's awesome. Give it up for Stephan. You had to wait 50 minutes to talk, but it's worth it, because now we're going to talk about your music. So here's there's a photo we have of you and Stu sort of in the studio talking about this. So tell us about that process now that you have that many more tools in this 8-bit program. How do you sort of bring that forward and remaster the music? What did you do?
Well, so first I got to acknowledge what a crazy, surreal experience this is to sit with the Insomniac guys who first created the game, our Toys for Bob team, Tom and Stewart. I mean, the fact that I'm on the stage sharing it with them is pretty incredible, and working on this project. Yeah. As you can see, I got to go to Stewart's studio and hang out with him for a better part of the day, and that was incredible. So, but yeah, I think while Josh and Tom argue about whether it's the voice acting or the animation that makes Spyro's character, I'm going to step in there and say that you're both wrong, and I think it's the music.
We know.
It is, yes, and the entire world, really, because I mean, one thing about the game is that, at the time it featured the soundtrack that was just really innovative in its style and its execution. And I think it's what really gave the world its color and gave Spyro his character. You know, we talked about the attitude and kind of punky thing, you know, and a lot of Stewart's music really reflects that. And so it was a pretty daunting task. You know, there's actually about 120 pieces of music, Stewart. And I'm kind of shocked to hear that it took him like 4, or it took him 1 day to do 4 tracks, because it certainly takes me more than 1 day to do just 1 track. So
well, that's because you weren't just following your instincts. You were having to follow something that was there and figure, what the heck was he doing here? I could have sent you the MIDI. It would.
Yeah, he tells me. He likes to rip on us for that, but we had some crossed lines of communication, so we didn't realize we had access to some of that stuff. But it was a pretty incredible process. You know, we really wanted to stay true to the originals and their intention and style. We didn't want to completely flip the script and do something that people were going to be like, what, this doesn't even sound like Spyro music, you know? And at the same time, like, we wanted to open up these themes so we could integrate them into the game in different ways. You know, back, I mean, in 20 years, not only do we have more poly counts, but we can also do more interesting things with the music and have it feel more reactive to the gameplay. And so we reconstructed pretty much all of Stewart's music, and what that allowed us to do is to create a more dynamic experience for the player as you're playing through the level. Like, we'll do things like anytime Spyro does this charge move, we'll apply like a rhythmic effect to the music and layer in some additional percussion. So I don't have an asset to show you, but you just have to take my word for it that when you do that charge move and you hear the music escalate, it feels really great. And there's a couple of other things that we're doing that you'll hear in the game too. But yeah, we really wanted to stay true to the originals, and you know, Stewart's written this amazing music, and we didn't want to like change much of it at all, you know. And part of that was also locating some of those original sound sources that were being used on the original soundtrack. There's like very specific things, like there's like the Chinese pipas and cloud temples and like the chanting in Colossus, which if I had better vocal cords, I'd do for you right now, but fortunately I don't. But yeah, like, we're like, where did this stuff come from? Because it doesn't sound like, you know, like 8-bit, like Fairlight samples. So we actually found a lot of those old sound libraries, and we purchased them, secured them for the project. And so actually a lot of the material is the original samples that were used. So you'll hear a lot of those same melodies, like played in exactly the same way. So that's been really awesome, actually. And you know, I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and hopefully we've, you know, recreated these compositions faithfully and spruced them up a little bit for the 20-year anniversary. And you know, music, we also really understand that music is one of those things that really hits people on like a deeply personal level, and we totally get that. And you know, our recreation is, I'm really proud of, but we totally understand that there may be fans who prefer the original music to play the game. And it's been really difficult keeping this under wraps, because we've had this feature into the game as soon as we started putting music in the game, which was many months ago. But we're happy to announce that the player will have the ability to switch to the original soundtrack at any time in the game. So.
Cool, amazing.
So you kind of get like a 2-for-1, you know, you get a 2-for-1, you get our work, and then of course you get Stewart's amazing work.
Compare, see how you did, right? Back and forth.
Me personally, I'm going to be doing with Stephan's, because Stephan was able to do what Michael Johns and I talked about, which is that when he goes into an area of jeopardy, the bass line comes up and throbs a bit harder. When he comes out into the sunshine, the drum, you know, we talked about doing all these interactive with the gameplay kind of things with the music, but by the time we came to it, Michael and the rest of your crew over there had used up every megabyte or kilobyte, and there was that much bandwidth left in the music. So it was just ran stereo, just sat there for the whole level. Now, those same riffs do what we always dreamed of doing. So in fact, Stephan is clearer to the original vision than I was. It could be said.
Wow. Amazing. Oh, wait. Oh, wait, here we go. Amazing. So you get the original and the new stuff in the Reignited Trilogy. But wait, there might be more. Stewart, do you want to do the honors and tell us about how you might have done a little something extra?
Well, because that music made such an impression on me, because as I said, I played it with my kids, that, you know, the music does get into your heart. And it's all, the Spyro music has always stuck with me as it may have stuck with you. And finally, I came around to the point of thinking, I've got to write the symphony. I've got to pull this together and have 60 guys playing this. And so I've been writing. It so happens I've written the concerto, and I was working on that when the call came in from Activision. And it turns out that there's one more page that I never scored, which is with this new game. You open up the game, you got to go take a left to go to the year 1 or take a right to go to year 2. So there's an entirely old piece of music. It's a new piece of music, but it's all those riffs. As many of those themes as I could crammed into this gigantic orchestral piece that is the introduction to the new game.
So brand new track Stewart put together. It'll be on the menu, allow you to pick through it all, and now we've got an exclusive preview of it for you. Sneak preview. Now, of course, you got to get the full game in September if you want to, you know, hear all the music, but and that new track, which is amazing. So it's so cool that Stewart put that together for the game. Well, we will check out the game this fall. Thank you all for being on the panel, and for all you in the audience, we have something special. This poster you're seeing right here. You're all getting it. You should have gotten a ticket, I think, during the panel. If you go to the redemption or gifting room over at the Marriott, you'll be able to pick that up. So that's Spyro Reignited Trilogy. I want to thank all our panelists, special guests. It's so cool for me to see this game back 20 years later. An amazing franchise, an amazing remaster. Enjoy the rest of your Comic-Con, and make sure to check out Spyro Reignited Trilogy later this year. Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Everybody.